So here is the Photoshop interface. Basically, as you were seeing earlier, I was dragging and dropping different raster graphic files here as we were pulling images off of the websites that we were looking at. And that's exactly how I opened this file here. You could also go to File, New, and you have all these different kind of presets that you can pop documentation open. Otherwise, just over here, defining a width and height and inches, pixels, and so on, resolution here is another way to do it. All Photoshop files allow for transparent backgrounds, such as this. Otherwise, you can do black, white, or custom color background. So I always start with like a transparent background when I'm creating a new Photoshop file. But I actually have existing images here, and you will too. So you're not really going to have to, create something from scratch. But if you do, that's where you would go in your process for doing something like that. I do want to bring your attention to, now this is the landscape.jpg file that are part of the demo files that you have downloaded from the Moodle if you wanted to follow along. But I'm just opening this up straight into Photoshop JPEG. Under the image panel here, this is probably the first stop that I would go to when I open any image in Photoshop, just so I'm understanding how big this thing is in reality and how many, what kind of resolution we're working with. But under image and image size, this is where you would find and learn all that. My image is 300 dpi. This is the print, optimal print resolution. This is the size at the optimal print resolution, 5.67, a little over 5.5 by 3 3/4 inches. Okay, so this is the size that this image could be printed at without losing any quality. It's 5.5, inches in width. Okay, if I want to increase the size of this image, I can, but my resolution is going to go down, okay? So let's say I wanted to double the size of this. If I highlight the width option and then start typing 10, okay, double the size, give or take some, you're going to see the resolution here is going to automatically set to 170, okay? Again, I'm blowing up the pixels, and then I'm basically stretching them out, so I don't have as much pixel density in the area of the object that I have. Whether or not I want, sometimes you'll want to do that, okay? So and oftentimes you'll want to do that. So if I wanted to blow this up to 10 inches wide, I would just do that and hit OK. And then I would actually go back and say, now let's say I wanted to print this thing out, okay? So I'll go back to image and image size, and then I'll hit this resample button, and I'm going to say, well, now I want this at 10 inches wide, but I need this to have a 300 pixel resolution. So under resolution, I'm going to change that to 300, not 3000, 300 with my resample button checked. Okay, and then I'm going to see that this image panel is going to change a little bit. Okay, we're kind of going through this earlier as I was walking through some of the other image assets on the sites we were talking about. So here's what this would look like at 100%. It looks pretty decent, but you have a couple different options here in this drop-down. Now this is a place that I'll also frequently visit, but you can, when you're enlarging something here, you can preserve the details for the enlargement by doing this preset, or you can make the enlargement smoother by choosing this preset. There's a couple of other ones too here, so like nearest neighbor would be like for sharper edges. It kind of gives you a clue of what each preset is going to do in this between the parentheses here. So depending on if I if I really want the details in my enlargement, I'm going to choose this preserve details enlargement image. So this is like for something that has like, facial detail or details of, perhaps it's like a product, like an industrial product or something that has a lot of hard edges and lines, I'll do that. Something with details, a lot of hair or something, I'll do that. If I want something smoother in the enlargement, like say for instance these clouds, they're poofy, so I want it to be a little bit smoother. I don't want like the artifacting that you can get if you enlarge a JPEG. I'll choose that. So for this instance, I'm going to choose that. It's kind of an art and kind of a science, right? You're kind of picking based on your eye, but also keeping in mind that enlarging something is going to decrease the quality to your eye based on the pixels that, based on the resolution that it currently is and the size you're blowing up to. So this is pretty much as good as this image is going to get as far as from a quality standpoint, okay? This is it at 100% now, so it's taking up a little bit more of the screen. It's double the size that it originated from. So every image that you want to get from a small to large, you would go through that process where you jump to image and image size and then so on and make those adjustments as needed. Okay. Every JPEG that you bring in is going to be locked. Okay. This background layer is automatically become locked. So a JPEG image has one layer, right? We talked about it last time. It doesn't have layers to it. But now that it's in Photoshop, I can add, layers to it. I can break it off of its original layer. So it's going to come locked, as you can see here. This is my layers panel. Now this panel is something that you're going to work into a lot in Photoshop. Layers are a huge part of this software. So to unlock this background layer, I'm going to double click the layer name here. And it's going to ask me for a new name, so I'll just call it something that makes sense to me, landscape. The reason why we name our layers is because typically if I'm working on a composition with a lot of elements, I'm going to be creating a lot of layers in here, and it could get kind of complex. So just kind of try and get in the habit of that unless you're going to make layers and know that you're going to delete them later on. Another big important thing, okay, besides unlocking that background layer when you're working with an image in Photoshop, is changing the color mode, okay? So right now, you can see up here what the color mode is. It's RGB, okay? So that's what we talked about last time in red, green, and blue pixels. This is the screen color mode, okay? So to change that to print, I'm going to go to image mode and then CMYK color. Now that's going to change it for you, okay? Let me close this layers panel out and then open up my history. The history panel, you can go back to individual steps while you're editing an image, okay? So it's a lot different from Illustrator to where I can't, continue pressing the Command Z or the Edit Undo button over and over again. I can only edit undo one time. I can only go back one step. Every time I click Command Z, which is what I'm doing now, it just goes back and forth. It goes back one step, forward one step, back one step, forward one step. Yes? Command Option Z? Oh yeah, you can do that now. Okay. So you can do that there too. That's a nice tip. Thank you. So you can do that, Command Option Z then. Otherwise, if you want to go back a certain step, like sometimes this I'll fill up with my history with like a lot of different things like select, invert color, just a lot of different things you can do. You can even go back to any kind of step you want here too. So I remember in my history when I opened the document it was this, but when I changed the image size it was that. Okay, so if you want to undo that way you can do it as well. So yeah, a lot of options there. So here's my CMYK color and here's my RGB differences. So remember last time we were talking about how RGB color mode and CMYK color mode give you some different results here. So especially in the sky, you can see that the sky gets a little bit gray when I go back to CMYK. So here's CMYK, and then here's back to RGB. The blues are a lot more blue. So when I convert to CMYK and I want to make my blues in the sky kind of bluer to the point to where they were in the RGB color mode, I have to actually physically go in there and kind of edit those pixels, okay? So what I'm going to do is open my layers back up, make sure that my landscape layer is selected here, and then I'm going to go to Image and Adjustments, and I can actually go to Selective Color here. And what Selective Color is going to allow me to do is actually pick a color from the image layer that I have selected currently, which is a landscape layer. And I can use this drop down to target different pixel colors within that panel, okay? So if I target the cyan colors in this background image, okay, well, you know what, I'm going to target the blues. If I target the blues and I see here my inks, right, my cyan, magenta, yellow, and the black, I can increase or decrease the intensity of those inks individually, and it's just affecting the blue pixels, okay, on my screen. So I'm going to bring the cyan up more, and with my preview box checked, I can kind of turn it on or off to see, kind of like my steps. So now it's getting more blue. To maybe give it more yellow, and maybe more magenta if I want it to be a little bit more of the darker, I'll just kind of bring it down just a little bit. A lot of times I'll just tweak this like that until I'm kind of happy with it. So this is taking the entire background image and just saying, okay, blues, I'm going to give you some more cyan to, you know, bring you out a little bit closer to what I had earlier. I can also do that with the greens this way too. So now I'm affecting this this vegetation on the bottom. If I kind of increase the yellow here and the greens and the cyan, you're kind of getting a little bit more green there intensity. So see, it kind of seems a little yellow now, but then it's coming back when I'm previewing on to make it look more lush kind of green. Can't really notice that until you kind of mess with it a little bit, turn it on or off, and so on and so forth. So let's say you're happy with that and you can hit OK. That's one way of selecting and editing individual pixels, in the software. Another way you can do it is by going into your Channels menu. So Channels is right next to Layers. You remember last time we talked about, channels being able to separate your cyan, magenta, yellow, and black inks in the image. So just like on a press, each plate on the press would press a different color onto the sheet of paper that's going in, layering cyan, magenta, yellow, black inks on top of each other to create the color spectrum that we can see in print. You can kind of do that in Photoshop too, and select individual elements on the page based on the color that they're most that they have most of. Okay, so for this instance, to select this grass area, I hit yellow. Okay, that's kind of got most of it there, and it's hiding everything else. So see, here's cyan and yellow. This is kind of those two colors put together in a preview. Here's magenta, cyan, yellow. You can see that the black is kind of pretty much gone there, okay? So let me just turn those off and just keep the yellow on. And now you can see that there's the most contrast here in the grass on the yellow channel between the grass and the sky. what you can do is actually hit this Load Channel as Selection button, and that's going to select all of the black pixel, or all of, it looks black to us on screen, but that's actually what yellow is, okay? It's a negative, so it's just the yellow pixel channel here. And then if I click Layers again, and then select and create a new layer, creating a new layer, I'll just hit this little swatch here on the bottom of the Layers panel called, well, when you hover over it says Create New Layer. It'll create that layer, and you'll still see that I have a selection on the screen, so you can really see it easily here. You can see those marching ants, they're kind of tracing out what I had loaded that channel for as a selection, okay, in my channels panel. So now I just have that area selected. Let's see what kind of changes here. Now I might have to invert that, but let me check it out. And actually I'm going to turn this new layer off and then start editing the landscape. So I have that selected. Under Image Adjustments, I can go to HueSaturation. This I can, this menu option will allow me to target areas, but then change their entire hues altogether. So let me just drag this around. So you can see I'm actually selecting all of the opposite of the yellow pixels. So I'll go back and go to Select Inverse. So this is going to reverse the existing selection that I have, and now it'll target the grass. Now you can see it's got that marching ants around where I need it to be. So under Image Adjustments then, HueSaturation, you know, if I wanted to do like a fall scene or something like that. I mean, you would actually take a picture in reality, but you know, you can move these sliders around to kind of change the whole perspective of it, turn on or off my preview. Not to say you would ever want to do that, but this kind of shows you that you can select individual pixels based on the color hues that you're selecting using different things in Photoshop. You can select using just the color family, you know, the blues or the cyans, etc. You can select using that color family, but within the channels menu, etc. So let's just say I was happy with that, and you can kind of, you know, see that there's different ways of doing kind of the same thing. Now those concepts come into play a little later on when we get into like masking or cutting out people's hair, right? If you have an image of someone with blonde hair on a dark background, they're going to have a lot of yellow in their hair. So you would want to select maybe the yellow channel or something like that, and then do an inverse, and then kind of target their hair, and then cut them out that way, change their hair color altogether. This kind of is going to come into play with shoes too. In the project, we look at our shoes or our products or what have you, and we create new products out of those existing products by changing colors to, you know, things that appeal to us, you know, as a consumer, and so on. If I had a shoe company and I wanted to show a prospective customer, like maybe I'm a designer that wants to show a brand owner what my ideas are for the fall collection series. I could just Photoshop it rather than having a production, you know, a bunch of production people building the shoe and kind of sell them through the imagery rather than go through all that overhead cost of building a shoe from scratch kind of a thing. This is kind of, Photoshop is used as a sales tool in that regard. And a lot of times I've used Photoshop to sell things. Let me go through some kind of other things. You remember we unlocked this layer. So with it unlocked, I'm able to move this around, and you can see that this is a transparent layer behind it. You know it's transparent because it's got this checkerboard pattern. So whenever you see that, that's going to be a transparent layer, okay? The layer that I created on top of this existing layer, I'm turning it on or off here by using this little eye icon on the side. There's nothing there. It's completely transparent, as my thumbnail is showing. Nothing's really going to happen there unless I, create some kind of object there. So I can maybe put some type. My computer catches up here. Maybe it's too big. Hold on a second. Well, anyhow, let me go and demonstrate the tools here with this. So I'm going to actually Photoshop this to start building the composition and use all of these tools that we have here. So this I'm actually done with. So for this composition, my idea is to have the UFOs kind of looking like they're about to abduct some cows. It's just a concept that I had in my head, and I just wanted to put it together. And I think there's a lot of tools in Photoshop that we can use to get it done. So the first thing what I'm going to do is look at the cow. This is my destination image. This is where all my elements are going to kind of come. So if I go over to image and image size, I'm going to see how big this is. This is 12 inches by 9.5 at 300. Okay, gotcha. This is at CMYK mode, so image mode, I've just got CMYK checked. That's fine. Let me go back to my UFO image and see that I have here as an RGB image. So first thing I'm going to do right off the bat is just convert this to CMYK mode. Alright, so that doesn't really change much of anything. There's a little brightness here that got lost. So I'm in CMYK mode. I'm going to go over to image size. This is my next most important thing. This thing is really, it's going to be way too big. So I'm going to uncheck resample image and then go 300. Okay, so making this image smaller, it was originally 27 inches. So I'll hit OK. This is probably, oh, it might be too small. Let me go back here. Under my marquee here, I have this elliptical marquee tool. I'm just going to kind of trace this big UFO. I'm going to go back here and select my move tool. The shortcut for the move tool is V, so that's one that I'll use basically all the time. And then drag and drop it in. This is probably too small, so I'm going to have to blow this up. Image size. So let me go 15. And then I want to make sure that my resolution does go down here, because I just want to do a straight resample of it. And I do want to keep the details preserved, okay, because this has a little more detail than like clouds or something like that. So then I'll hit OK. And if you're waiting for it when you're enlarging, that's probably a good sign. So then I'll take my marquee again. This shortcut for that is M, and depending on what you have selected last time you went back to this tool, M will be the shortcut to that tool. So if I were in the elliptical and I hit M, I would go elliptical. If I had the regular marquee selected and I was on another tool and I hit M, it would go to the rectangular marquee. So this is just something, it kind of defaults to the last object that you were using in the file menu. You're just going to click on that item when you see that little arrow on the bottom right and hold, and then it'll give you more options, okay? So under that marquee then, you click and hold, you can get the single row marquee, elliptical, etc. So I'll go back to the move and just bring this over the cow image and see how that's sized fine. So cool. I'm going to use this image as it is now. Now there's a couple ways to be more efficiently bring this over. you know, I could use a lot of different, you know, Photoshop is a lot about you can do a lot of things with in different ways. So the lasso tool is the tool that I could quickly select this UFO and show you how to do that. So under the lasso tool, you can select this magnetic lasso option. And what the magnetic lasso tool is going to do is actually, when you click on an area and then drag your mouse around it, it's actually going to select the contrasting pixels. So if I have like a darker version of blue against a lighter version of blue, like in this case, it's going to kind of trace what it thinks I'm trying to trace, just based on the contrast in pixels, okay? Sometimes you mess up like there. It's not perfect. So see how I kind of missed that edge? If you do that, you can see it's got anchor points that's plopping down here, like that. I can actually hit delete, and then it'll go back a step each time I delete, just so I can refine things a little bit better. Likewise, I'll just double click to close that out, okay? So I can double click too, and you can see that it kind of stopped my marquee. What you can do in that tool as well is adjust the frequency of the pixels that are plopped down. So right now the frequency is highest. Well, if it goes to 150. No. Yeah, it's the highest at 100. So that means it's going to plop down anchor points as I'm tracing more frequently than if it was at like 10. So here I'll put more anchor points down. And see how it's not putting anything down until, you know, it's almost not putting them down enough at that point. So what I'll do is then bring it back to 100 in frequency. Now I close this path out. Any tool that you want to add to your selection that you currently have, before you click with that tool on your layout here, is you would hit the Shift key, and you can see that you have like this tiny little plus sign. It's actually a plus sign that's coming on and off on my cursor tool. When you hold the Shift key and the plus sign comes up, you can then plop a point down and then keep moving along your image here, okay? This is the same for the pen tool. It's the same for the elliptical marquee, the rectangular marquee, etc. You can see I'm roughing this in pretty bad. But that's okay because I can go back and I can re-add to my selection if I needed to. See how I roughed that in really bad? I'll just, you know, hold Shift, click, and then just re-add what I need to. If I added too much, like there, that's okay too. Because I can always deselect and reselect over and over again. I mean, it's best to do it, you know, in one shot, but if you're strapped for time, it's not that big of a deal. It's not the end of the world kind of a deal. That's sufficient. So to clean this piece up, I'm going to choose the pen tool. It's pretty rough up here. Let me fix that. So again, I'm just selecting and then double clicking to close it out. Let me get the pen tool, and this is my favorite tool. So what I'm going to do with the pen tool is actually just create a path. Some people are more, you know, comfortable with it. This is just like from Illustrator. If I want to turn the corner with this radius, make it pointy, you can hold the Option key, click, and then make a pointy radius like that. Okay, you have full control of your drawing here in Photoshop too. So I made my selection. I'm actually want to deselect what I overshot in my selection here. So under paths, this is in next to my links, I'm sorry, layers and channels panel here. There's a drop down. You can see the work path that I just created is kind of a tiny thumbnail of it. You click Make Selection, and then here you can choose to subtract from selection. So this is applying a quality to the pen tool selection that I just made. I can add to, I can subtract from, I can intersect, etc., etc. So I'll just hit OK to subtract that from that selection. Okay. If I wanted to add, you know, I saw here when my pen tool was let's say it was a good tool for that to give me a lot more control. You know, with more control, it's going to take a little more time. Again, I'll go to Paths, Make Selection, and then just add to it. All right, so long story short, that's pretty much the selection there. But I want some of this glowing light too. And selecting that is going to be a little more difficult. So what I'm going to do is go over to Layers, and then what I'm actually going to do is go over here. This is my Edit in Quick Mask Mode option. So the Edit in Quick Mask Mode option, if you click on this area here, and you're going to see my color that I chose to show my preview of what I have selected is green. You can turn this on or off, and if you double click it fast enough, you can change the Quick Mask Mode color. You know, if you want something different, more contrast or something, you can do it that way too. So pink. What you can do is select something with a feathered edge with like a brush in this mode. So in this mode, I can choose a brush. I can make it, under my brush options, it's going to populate up here, but I can make the opacity a certain setting here. I'm going to keep it at 100%, but I'm going to make it really like soft edged, okay? So now I'm brushing in a soft edge. Let me jump out of Quick Mask Mode, and now you can see I'm creating a selection based on what my brush is doing. Okay. I can do I can make it a little more opaque too using the opacity. Okay, up here. So my opacity, I'll bring it to like 30% opacity. I just want to, and see it's barely making any brush dent in it whatsoever. Let's say I'm good with that. Fine. Okay, I'm jumping out of Quick Mask Mode. Now I'm going to click this object with my Move tool up here. See how this edge, now it's kind of a little transparent. It's transparent like the brush, so the brush pixels is actually selecting something with some transparency to it. And then I can just bring it over here, and you can see I still have some feathering, you know, going on that. It's not perfect, but it is a little bit transparent, okay? So this object I can bring over here, and actually I should show you. So I'm moving this around independently on this canvas, okay? This is called Layer 1. I'm changing it to UFO 1. So we kind of know. To transform this, meaning to make it scale it down, you'd never want to scale it up using the transform tool because you're going to lose that quality. So let me go to Edit Transform, Scale. Okay, so Edit Transform Scale. Otherwise, the quick shortcut for that is Command T, T as in toy. And you can actually scale this down a little bit using that. Command T again. I'm going to tweak it a little bit. in the corner here. So this has got to be in the background, this piece here. So actually, I'm going to bring it on this side. That makes it easier. Actually, it's probably better composition anyway. So what I want to do is actually make this kind of light a little more believable. It kind of still looks like it's been photoshopped a bit. So with this UFO layer 1, I'm actually going to hold my Alt-Option key with my cursor hovering over this layer, and I'm duplicating this layer by clicking and dragging, and then seeing it kind of duplicate here with my Option key selected, and then just dropping it. So now I have two layers of this UFO artwork. So that was just a click, Option, drag in my layers panel on that thumbnail. So I'm going to take the pen tool again. I'm going to go to my top UFO layer here, UFO 1, and I'm going to actually trace out the edge of the UFO in that negative space that I'm seeing behind this kind of sunburst, outlining it, going to paths again, make selection, and I'm going to have new selection here checked off, but I'm going to give it some feathering. I think like 3 pixels. So this is going to kind of feather the edge a little bit so it won't be such a sharp cut. Okay. Now, with that selected, all I really want is this, this faded piece, right? This light. So I'm actually going to go to Image. I'm sorry, I'm going to go Select and Inverse. So up to Select and Inverse. So again, just like before when we did with the color changing of that scenery, I'm just selecting the opposite of what I had traced in my tool. And then I'm going to hit my Move tool, and I'm going to hit Delete. You didn't see anything delete on the screen because I have a duplicate copy right behind it, this UFO layer. So I can turn it on or off, and this is in reality what's happened. The pixels are completely aligned on top of each other. I'm going to go to Image, Select, Inverse again, and that's going to go back to the picture of my burst there, and I'm going to delete it on the layer beneath it. Okay, so this is actually my UFO layer now, and I'll just rename it. And then this is actually my light layer, so this is my light. So both of these images together are making one element in the composition. So now what I want to do is take this light layer and I want to actually overlay it to the background to make it like blend in a little bit more, okay? So under my layers panel, I can adjust the opacity of it, so I can bring it down to like 50%, bring it up to 100. More importantly, I can use this this multiply option. This menu here, these are my so these are important because these options go from Photoshop to InDesign too. These are layer blending modes. Okay, so any layer in Photoshop, I can change the layer blending mode, and they do all kinds of different things. Multiply, and these, I don't know exactly what all of these do, but typically when I'm working with them, I just kind of go through this menu and click to see which one does what I want it to do. There's all kinds of different ones. Sometimes when you mess around with it just enough, you'll find the one that you feel like works the best. So luminosity versus normal. I actually think normal was better there. Color burn, none of those. I think probably screen. I want something overlay or normal. Could it be that? Nope. Actually, I'm going to go with normal. I think that blending mode actually works better. And then I'm going to just reduce the opacity then just a tiny bit. That'll work. I think that works better anyway. Yeah, I'll just keep it that way. So I just kind of adjusted it just a little bit subtly. Maybe I can actually duplicate this light layer and then do some erasing onto it. So I'll hit the E. Where's my eraser? There it is. So with E selected then, eraser tool, I'll bring my opacity down like 15% and just kind of brush it a little bit. 30 is better. So take a little more away. Here we go, I just wanted a little bit more. So I'm going to take these layers here that creates this image, and I'm going to actually group them into a folder so I don't have to manage 3 layers, I can just manage the one. So if I go over to this create new group icon here on the bottom right, and I'll just click that, it's going to give me group 1. Okay, so within group 1 on this drop down, it's all 3 of my layers I started with, and I'll call it UFO 1 again for the group. So just like any other layers, then you can multiply the group by alt-clicking and dragging, and then kind of having your duplicate. So Command-T to transform, I'll rotate and then shrink. I can just create multiples of this object. And then using this, what I want to do actually is blend this a little bit more. So I want to make this so that it's a little bit blurrier from the foreground, so it kind of looks like it's at a distance in the background. So what I have to do for that is actually to merge this group of pieces of art together. So this folder that's called UFO copy 1, I'll call it UFO 2 just so I'm not confusing too much. And then under this layer here, layer option, I can merge group. So with the layer selected again, I can go up to this this more options little tab here, and then go merge group. There's a shortcut for that. It's Command E, but you know, yeah, it's not used often enough to where I would recommend to really memorize that shortcut. It's just to each their own, depending on how many times you use grouping, etc. So anyhow, you know, a real quick and easy fix for that would be to go to filter, blur, and then Gaussian blur. And of course, that's a huge amount of blur. You'll just want to do like a little subtlety to it. So there's 2 pixels there. To me, it makes all the difference in the world on my screen. And then you can kind of go from there. I can actually alt click and drag on the desktop or the artboard itself, and then duplicate that. So now you can see UFO 2 copy, UFO 3. I'll rename that. Drag this behind. See how I'm kind of dragging these elements, you know, forward and behind each other, right? So this is another like a dimension in Photoshop. Dealing with layers is something that's going to come helpful to you. So let me just do another tweak for that, and then I'll blur it a little bit more. This guy's going to go way in the back. So it's going to be pretty stinking blurry. Let's blur that again. All right. So that's kind of the composition there. My cowl layer, I never really mess with it, but it's not too late to make any adjustments to it. this time, instead of using the selective color or choosing a channel and manipulating it that way, right? So here's our yellow pixels, magenta, cyans. For this image, what I'm going to do is actually use my levels panel, which is actually one that really does a lot for an image. So under image adjustments and levels, levels really takes all of the channels, combines cyan, magenta, yellow, black, and can boost the brights and then boosts the darks. So it really gives you a really good increase of contrast. So if I take this slider and then bring it to the right, you can see that the darks really get darker. And then if I take this image on the right and then bring it to the left, you can see the brights get a lot brighter. So every photo that I bring into Photoshop, essentially I don't use it just stock. I'll always open up the levels and just nudge this a little bit here, nudge this a little bit there, just to boost contrast. It just helps. So that's one I'll always do. These gray tones, these can be adjusted too, okay? So they can either go brighter or the grays can go darker. A lot of time I'll keep in the middle, but I'll look at the image and say, what do I need more of? Maybe it needs to be a little bit brighter. So I'll bring it to the bright side. And then I'll bring the dark a little bit further. And you see this arc, right? Like, use your best judgment. If I go too far towards this arc, it's going to get really dark and it just look kind of really bad. Like that's kind of not really what you want, but maybe it is what you want. You never really know. Okay, so levels is good to do. This image also, when I go into 100%, you can see I have this, probably not on that screen, but if I go closer, you can see this is called artifacting. So this happens when you have a smaller image that's blown up to be larger. What I'll do to fix that is I'm going to have to do a little bit of add a little bit of noise over here under my filter menu, and then dust and scratches. This helps kind of smooth out a little bit. My radius is going to be the is going to be what it's going to spread the blending a little bit more, and my threshold is going to be the amount of blending. And this is all really subtle. Or I'm sorry, the threshold is the amount of detail allowed. So I went really extreme and I brought my pixel radius up really high. So if I bring it down to 5 and then allow a little more detail by increasing the threshold, so it's detail versus kind of blurring or blending, if you will, then you can kind of find a happy medium. And little steps with this tool makes a lot of difference. And see, that's almost way too much. We'll do 2. And this is going to have to go down. Really hard to see here, but you can see how this little cow guy, it's helping the artifacting a little bit, but it's just a judgment call. Really. I think this might be not the best filter to use, so I'm just going to hit OK with it and then go to noise again and do median instead. This is going to give a little more effect here. It's killing the detail of the cow, but it's kind of like helping the sky a little bit more, so I'll just hit OK on that. It didn't kill the detail of the cow too much, but it's kind of a compromise. And then hue saturation. You know, I targeted a specific color with hue saturation earlier. Again, this is image adjustments, hue saturation. But you can also do a couple of different things with it too. Without moving my hue slider, I can increase the saturation in all the hues equally. So just the saturation. Turn that on or off. It gets a little much. So you don't want to add too much there. Okay. Lightness and darkness, that'll tweak that too. Otherwise, you can actually completely change the color of this entire image by hitting the colorize button and then dragging to find a different hue that you want, and then increasing the intensity of the hue using that too. So maybe different kinds of output might call for that. But that is a very highly destructive kind of type of editing. I'll show you destructive and non-destructive color editing, but that'll come on Wednesday. Let me see here. Oh, a couple more things I got to show you. So curves is much like levels as well, except it's just kind of a different format, right? Remember the channel, when levels said channel, CMYK as well. This does the same thing, except it just kind of, they say, gives you more control. See the wavelengths that you have here, very similar to levels. For this option, though, you can plot the points. This is like a gray balance adjuster here in Photoshop. But you can actually plot points on this line, and you can adjust the gray balance via this curve line, right? So here's my darks, you know, getting darker, and my brights, you know, essentially getting brighter, and then my midtones can be adjusted too. They say you have more control with curves. I don't know. For me, I always just stick with levels and just kind of go that way. There's so many other different, you know, again, just like a lot of things in this software, there's different ways of doing the same thing. Okay. Sharpen. So this is just a really common one. This UFO image is pretty sharp, but I'll just kind of sharpen it a little more. So by selecting that layer, I can't sharpen this entire folder, right? I have to go drill down into the folder, select the layer in the folder, and then go to Filter, Sharpen. This is going to be what I'm actually sharpening here. So I have to really target that thing. Now, for here, it's just really increasing. Oh, I'm freezing up here. Shoot. Yeah, I'm freezing up pretty bad.